In the heart of Rome's early imagination, blood was not waste, it was nourishment for the dead. The Romans inherited this idea from the Etruscans, whose funerary rites sometimes demanded human sacrifice. Frescoes from ancient tombs in Tarquinia show armed figures locked in combat near burial chambers, suggesting that death itself required blood to mark its passage. When Rome absorbed these traditions, it did not simply preserve them, it transformed them. The first recorded Roman spectacle took place in 264 BCE, when Decimus Junius Brutus Sceva staged combat between three pairs of slaves in the Forum to honor his deceased father. What might appear a family duty was in fact an offering. The Latin munus meant both duty and gift, and spilling blood in the Forum was meant to sustain the spirit of the departed and secure its favor. To Roman eyes, this was not entertainment, but devotion to holy violence witnessed under the sky of the city. Yet from the start, the Romans displayed their pragmatism. Unlike the Etruscans, who had treated the sacrifice as sacred necessity, Romans saw potential in shaping it into something larger. Instead of quiet rituals near tombs, they staged combat in public spaces, planting the idea that private grief could be turned into communal spectacle. Religion was a beginning, but politics already stood in the wings. Cultural influences poured into this new ritual. From the Greeks came the concept of athletics, competition not just for death but for performance and skill. From the Celts came the raw ferocity of ritual combat, where warriors fought as if possessed by gods. Each conquest of Rome added another layer to the repertoire of blood. By combining sacred duty with foreign practices, Rome laid the foundations for something unique in history, the transformation of funeral blood offerings into a machine of spectacle. Imagine the Forum on that first day in 264 BCE, a makeshift arena, the crowd hushed, the fighters stripped to the waist, armed with weapons that gleamed in the sun. The blows were not simply against flesh, but against the veil between living and dead. When one fell, blood soaking into the earth, Romans believed the spirit of the honored ancestor drank deeply. But in that silence, another hunger awoke the crowd's own fascination. What began as solemn duty was already becoming theater. This was the seed from which the Roman games would grow. From ancestor worship to mass entertainment, from whispered prayers to roaring crowds, the trajectory was set. The sacred would soon give way to the profane, and violence once meant for the dead would become the currency of the living. As Rome shifted from ritual to republic, blood in the arena became more than sacrifice, it became leverage. By the late Republic, staging games was no longer a matter of honoring the dead, but of winning the living. Families of stature competed to outdo one another, each striving to host a spectacle grander than the last. A funeral contest of a few pairs of fighters might impress neighbors, but for a senator eyeing high office, only dozens, sometimes hundreds of gladiators would suffice. These were investments, each coin spent soaked in the promise of political capital. The historian Pliny, the elder, later lamented that what had begun as sacred had been corrupted by luxury and ambition. He was right. By the 2nd century BCE, the solemnity of the munus had collapsed into spectacle, fueled by rivalry. The crowd did not come to witness piety. They came for blood, for scale, for the thrill of seeing men fall beneath steel. And the politicians gave it to them, knowing that every cheer was a vote cast in the arena. No figure understood this better than Julius Caesar. In 65 BCE, he staged games on a scale that stunned Rome, hundreds of gladiators filling the Forum, their armor glinting like a field of bronze fire. The Senate, wary of the power such spectacles could wield, attempted to limit the number of gladiators one man could exhibit. But Caesar, ever the master of bending law into theater, found ways to circumvent these restrictions. His games were not just entertainment, they were propaganda, carefully crafted demonstrations of wealth, generosity, and authority. Crowds that filled the wooden stands did more than cheer, they absorbed a message. Caesar provides. Caesar entertains. Caesar commands life and death. For the masses struggling with debt, hunger, and political uncertainty, such displays offered an intoxicating escape. They left the arena not only dazzled, but bound to the man who had orchestrated their joy. This logic hardened into a governing philosophy that Juvenal later captured in his bitter phrase, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Keep the stomach full, and the eyes delighted, and the people would not question deeper injustices. The games became not merely spectacles but safety valves, designed to pacify the urban masses with controlled chaos. Bloodshed in the arena channeled the city's anger away from the Senate's marble steps and into the sand. Thus, what began as offerings to the dead had by the late Republic become the lifeblood of politics. Gladiators were not only fighters but tools, their bodies spent as currency in Rome's brutal marketplace of ambition. And once politicians discovered the power of the crowd's appetite, there was no turning back. The games were no longer optional, they were essential to survival in the Republic of Knives. When the Republic collapsed and Augustus rose as Rome's first emperor, the games took on a new dimension. No longer were they just tools of individual politicians clawing for office. Now they became instruments of empire, woven into the very fabric of imperial power. Augustus understood better than anyone that the arena was not simply a stage for blood, it was a stage for authority. The emperor's presence at the games was never casual. Seated in the imperial box, draped in purple, he was visible to tens of thousands. Every eye turned toward him, for he alone embodied the fate of fighters below. The gesture of his hand thumb turned, palm raised, became a symbol of absolute power. Though the popular idea of thumbs up or down is debated by historians, the essence is clear. In the theater of the arena, the emperor's will was law, life and death balanced on his decision. The message to the crowd was unmistakable. Just as he controlled the combatants, so too he controlled the empire. The symbolism was profound. The emperor did not merely watch, he presided like a god of mortality. Each roar of the crowd reinforced the sacred aura of his office, transforming political power into a near-religious ritual. For the common Roman, it was as though Jupiter himself had descended to judge. The games were no longer just entertainment, they were liturgy and the cult of empire. Behind the theater, however, lay an immense machinery of business. Gladiatorial schools, the Lud, grew into massive enterprises. Owned by wealthy Lannistae, they housed, fed, and trained hundreds of fighters. Doctors, trainers, and even dietitians were employed to maximize the fighter's value. A single skilled gladiator could cost as much as a villa, his death representing a financial catastrophe as much as a human tragedy. Owners kept meticulous records of each man's wounds, victories, and potential profit. The crowd rarely saw this side of the trade. To them, the gladiator was both hero and victim, a figure at once despised and adored. Graffiti from Pompeii calls certain fighters Suspirium Pullarum, the girl's heartthrob. Yet in the ledgers of the Lud, those same men were assets, bought and sold, their flesh reduced to numbers on parchment. This was the paradox of the imperial arena. It was theater and industry, religion and politics, brutality and spectacle fused together. Augustus and his successors institutionalized it all, ensuring that each spectacle not only entertained but reminded Rome who ruled. And in the shadows of the Colosseum's rising walls, the machinery of empire learned a new truth. Control the games, and you control the people. By the time the Colosseum rose under Emperor Vespasian and was inaugurated by his son Titus in 80 CE, Rome had perfected not only the art of killing, but the architecture of astonishment. This amphitheater was not merely a building, it was a machine designed to orchestrate terror, awe, and obedience. Its very stones whispered Rome's power. 50,000 people could pour into its stands within minutes, funneled through vomitoria arched corridors that spat them into their seats with astonishing speed. Once inside, the audience beheld an elliptical arena engineered with precision. Every angle offered a perfect view of the sand where lives would be extinguished. The hierarchy of Rome was etched into the seating. Senators reclined in marble seats close enough to see the sweat on a gladiator's brow. Women, and the poor sat high above, their distance a reminder of their place in society. Yet no one, from patrician to plebeian, could escape the reality of death played out below. Beneath the arena floor lay the Hypogeum, a labyrinth of tunnels, lifts, and trapdoors. Here slaves and engineers labored in darkness, timing their cues to create shock and wonder above. A condemned man might wait in silence, hearing only the creak of pulleys, before suddenly rising into the blinding light, confronted not by a court but by a roaring crowd and a hungry lion. Stagecraft turned punishment into theater, surprise into spectacle. The sand itself was engineered for killing. Its grains absorbed blood, allowing combat to continue without delay. Drainage systems ensured that gore and rain alike would not spoil the spectacle. Movable barriers could reconfigure the battlefield, transforming it from gladiatorial pit to hunting ground, or even to a watery stage for mock naval battles. Rome had designed a killing field as adaptable as it was merciless. Even sound was part of the spectacle. The elliptical shape of amphitheaters carried the clash of swords and the screams of the dying to the furthest seats with uncanny clarity. The design made sure no spectator missed the moment of agony. The architecture itself conspired to amplify the theater of death. And then, there was water. The Colosseum could be flooded within hours, turning its floor into a shallow sea where ships clashed in miniature battles. These Namakea mock naval wars were feats of engineering unmatched for over a millennium. For spectators, it seemed the emperor had command not only of men but of the elements themselves. Rome had, in effect, mechanized awe. The Colosseum was not only a monument to violence, but a tool of governance, a demonstration that the empire could bend stone, water, and even human lives into instruments of spectacle. Every arch, every hidden passage, every drop of blood served the same purpose: to remind Romans that they lived under a power vast, merciless, and eternal. If the gladiator embodied skill and endurance, the beasts of the arena embodied chaos. From the farthest frontiers of the empire, animals were dragged into Rome as living symbols of conquest. Lions from Numidia, leopards from Syria, bears from Germania, even elephants from Carthage, each creature a trophy of imperial reach. Their arrival was as calculated as any triumph: cages clattering through city streets, drums beating, crowds marveling at the raw muscle and fangs destined for spectacle. The logistics were staggering. Ships hauled terrified animals across seas, chains rattling on their decks. Special handlers, venators, and trainers were employed to keep them alive, barely fed to heighten their ferocity. Beneath the Colosseum, a subterranean network of cages and ramps allowed stage managers to release predators with perfect dramatic timing. A lion could erupt from a trapdoor beside a condemned prisoner, transforming fear into sudden frenzy. The most infamous use of these beasts was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the animals. Criminals, rebels, and prisoners of war were paraded before the crowd, not for trial, but for annihilation. Some were bound to stakes, helpless as starved lions tore at their limbs. Others were given crude weapons, a mockery of fairness, before being overwhelmed by predators. To the spectators, this was not merely punishment but theater justice and entertainment fused into one bloody moment. The crowd's appetite was insatiable. Accounts tell of hundreds of animals slaughtered in a single day, their carcasses dragged from the sand while the audience clamored for more. For emperors, these spectacles sent a message: Rome not only conquered men, but nature itself. To watch an elephant collapse under a barrage of spears, or a panther disembowel a man, was to witness imperial dominion over the wild and the rebellious alike. Among the most tragic figures in this pageant were the bestiarii, those forced to fight the beasts. Some were criminals offered a chance to die with honor. Others were volunteers, men so desperate for coin or recognition that they stepped willingly into cages of near-certain death. Unlike gladiators who might build reputations and even win freedom, bestiarii had almost no chance of survival. Their role was to provide a brief illusion of contest before the inevitable. For the audience, these combats blurred the line between myth and reality. To see a man torn apart by a lion was to relive Hercules' battle with the Nemean beast, or Theseus facing the Minotaur. Rome staged its own mythology in blood and fang, with the condemned cast as unwilling heroes whose stories ended not in triumph but in carnage. In the arena, nature itself was weaponized. The empire that bent stone and water to its will also bent the animal kingdom, turning the wonders of its provinces into instruments of terror. And as the sand grew slick with blood, human and beast alike, Rome reminded its people that nothing, not even the wilderness, lay beyond its dominion. Rome's cruelty was never content with mere slaughter. The empire discovered that death itself could be turned into theater, draped in the familiar robes of mythology. In the fatal charades, condemned prisoners were forced to play roles from legend stories every Roman child knew only to die in them, their fates sealed long before the curtain rose. One such tale was Orpheus, the musician who could charm beasts with his lyre. In the arena, a doomed man was dressed as Orpheus, lyre in hand, and placed before lions. The crowd knew that the myth they waited for music to tame the wild. But when the beasts tore him apart, laughter and cheers filled the air. It was a parody of hope, a mocking inversion of divine power. Others played Daedalus, the master craftsman. Prisoners fitted with wax wings were pushed from platforms, their desperate flailing a grotesque imitation of flight before they crashed into the sand. Sometimes, animals were released to finish what gravity began. Women too were subjected to these charades. Some were forced into wooden contraptions shaped like cows, reenacting the myth of Pasiphae and the bull, their humiliation doubling as execution. For Prometheus, bound to the rock, men were tied to posts while trained birds of prey clawed at their flesh, pecking slowly at organs while the crowd delighted in their prolonged agony. The cruelty reached its height with fire. The tunica molesta, a shirt soaked in pitch and resin, transformed human beings into living torches. Nero infamously used such victims to light his gardens, but amphitheaters too embraced the spectacle. The condemned would be marched out at dusk, bound and ignited, their screams mingling with the cheers of an intoxicated audience. Fire was sacred to Romans, a symbol of purification. In turning people into torches, the state claimed the power to cleanse society itself, consuming enemies in flame as both punishment and illumination. These performances demanded resources as much as imagination. Costumes, props, stage machinery, all were prepared with the precision of a theater troupe. A man dressed as Hercules might be given a wooden club, only to face not mythical monsters, but real lions. Sets were painted, props arranged, entrances timed. It was theater in every sense, except for the unalterable truth that every actor's final line ended in death. For the audience, the horror was softened by familiarity. Myths they had grown up with played out before their eyes, yet with a twist that affirmed Rome's dominion. Gods and heroes belonged to legend, but here the empire dictated the ending. To watch Orpheus fall silent or Prometheus truly torn was to feel the state's hand rewriting the stories of the world. These fatal charades revealed something unsettling about Rome. Its genius lay not only in conquest but in imagination. By fusing culture with cruelty, myth with murder, the empire proved it could command not just bodies, but stories, and in doing so, reshaped the very meaning of spectacle. Rome's appetite for spectacle did not stop at land. The empire, restless in its ambition, sought to conquer the sea itself, and so the arena became an ocean. These watery spectacles, the naumachia, were mock naval battles on a scale that defied belief. For the first time in human history, stone and engineering bent to create entire seas within cities, where ships clashed and men drowned for the pleasure of the crowd. Julius Caesar had first experimented with the form, flooding a specially dug basin near the Tiber to stage a naval battle in 46 BCE. But under Augustus, the scale expanded. He ordered the construction of a permanent lake, vast enough to host fleets and thousands of combatants. Here, condemned men reenacted famous wars: Greeks against Persians, Carthaginians against Romans, dying in the roles of ancient enemies. It was history rewritten in blood, propaganda as performance. The Colosseum itself could be flooded, its hypogeum sealed and filled until shallow waters shimmered under the sun. Small warships, specially modified to sail in this artificial sea, were launched before tens of thousands. Crews of prisoners and slaves rowed, fought, and died, knowing their survival was never intended. Unlike gladiators, who at least clung to the hope of victory, those in naumachia faced certain death. If they somehow lived, execution awaited them once the spectacle was done. The logistics bordered on miraculous. Engineers designed sluices and aqueducts to fill the arena within hours, then drain it again for the next day's games. Artificial islands were built, obstacles scattered to mimic real harbors. Catapults fired, torches burned on the decks, and men plunged into waters that would become their tombs. Rome had mastered not only the land and its beasts, but the elements themselves. Beyond the capital, governors and provincial elites staged smaller versions to curry imperial favor. The expense was ruinous, but the political rewards immense. To host a naumachia was to prove both wealth and loyalty, an advertisement of Rome's power at the farthest reaches of its empire. Festivals magnified this cruelty. The Emperor Trajan's victory over Dacia in the early 2nd century CE was celebrated with a series of spectacles lasting 123 days. Ancient chroniclers claimed more than 10,000 gladiators and 11,000 animals perished, alongside naval combats staged on staggering scale. Whether exaggerated or not, the numbers reflect Rome's expectation that conquest be mirrored by carnage. Triumph was incomplete until sealed with blood. These spectacles were more than entertainment, they were imperial theater, propaganda on water and sand. By staging battles in which prisoners impersonated Rome's enemies, the state offered a living lesson. Resistance was futile. Victory was Rome's by destiny, and those who defied it would be drowned in blood and spectacle alike. Behind the thunder of applause, behind the machinery of the Colosseum, there were human lives, tens of thousands consumed by Rome's hunger for spectacle. Gladiators lived in the Lud, part barracks, part prison, part factory of death. They trained endlessly, drilled with wooden swords until their muscles ached, learning to parry, to kill, and above all, to die in a way that pleased the crowd. Some were slaves, others prisoners of war, a few even desperate volunteers seeking coin or fleeting fame. Their average career was brutally short, 2 to 5 years before the sand claimed them. Archaeology gives us fragments of their stories. In gladiator cemeteries, skeletons bear scars of healed wounds, evidence of skilled medical care designed not for mercy, but for profit. A valuable fighter might receive expert treatment for shattered bones, only to be sent back to fight again. Tombstones tell us names. Flama, who won his freedom 4 times yet returned to the arena until he died. Graffiti from Pompeii immortalizes others. Celadus, the heartthrob of the girls, a cruel irony, for their celebrity was bound to their expendability. Women, too, stepped into the arena. Female gladiators fought in matches that both titillated and scandalized, challenging Roman ideas of gender while reinforcing them through violence. Others, condemned criminals, endured humiliations more grotesque than death itself, their bodies offered up as symbols of what defiance or disgrace would earn. Families suffered as well. Wives and children of gladiators or condemned men lived in the shadow of the arena, their fates tied to the whims of spectators and emperors. A father's body broken in combat meant not only grief, but poverty, even enslavement for those left behind. As centuries passed, the tide shifted. Economic strain, plagues, and the rising influence of Christianity began to erode the appetite for blood. Constantine's conversion in the 4th century marked a turning point. Though he did not abolish the games outright, he forbade executions by combat, stripping them of their most lethal character. Chariot racing, less costly and more compatible with new faith, eclipsed the gladiatorial tradition. Amphitheaters were abandoned, repurposed as markets, workshops, even fortresses. By 435 CE, the last recorded gladiatorial contest was held, a faint echo of the centuries of carnage that had come before. Yet the shadow endured. Medieval tournaments, with their staged combats and armored knights, carried echoes of Rome's arenas. Public executions in Europe remained theater as much as justice, scaffolds replacing sand. Even modern sports stadiums packed with roaring crowds, heroes idolized for their skill and courage bear the architectural and emotional imprint of the amphitheater. Today, the Colosseum stands as a ruin, its arches framing the Roman sky. Tourists walk its passages, pausing on stones once slick with blood. It is no longer a theater of death, but a monument to memory, a reminder of the human cost of power, and of humanity's enduring fascination with violence as spectacle. Rome is gone, but its lessons remain etched in stone, in stories, and perhaps uncomfortably in ourselves.